Our Ideal is the Christ Consciousness. By Charles Thomas Casey. I received a letter from a member who was at Congress last June, which began like this. There has been a disturbance in the force. These words from a Star Wars film kept running through my mind while driving home from Congress 2000. Somehow that felt right to me. Part of the disturbance in the force, I think, had to do with the turmoil about this question of Jesus and the Christ consciousness. The force, the one force, the universal force is much bigger than any of the little parts of the disturbance. It's hard to describe exactly what stirred things up. But certainly this is a part of it. There is just no doubt in the Cayce readings about the spiritual ideal of this work. The readings say over and over that if this work is going to fulfill its purpose, there needs to be one spiritual ideal for the work. There will be lots of ideas, but one spiritual ideal. What is that ideal? The reading's response was that the universal Christ consciousness is the spiritual ideal. The ideal is supposed to be something that we can sense, that energizes us, that is the highest that we can conceive of for ourselves spiritually. The universal Christ consciousness is defined in the readings as an awareness within each soul, imprinted in pattern on the mind and waiting to be awakened by the will of our soul's oneness with God. A pattern not just within the souls of Christians or Jews or Muslims, but in every soul. Imprinted on the mind, not brain cells, but the larger concept of mind in the readings, waiting to be awakened by the will, our choice-making faculty. What's the nature of that pattern? It's an awareness of, an experience of our oneness with each other, our oneness with God, with the creative force of the universe. When I think about that spiritual ideal, I have an image of the ARE as a kind of giant tuning fork. To the extent that we as individuals can have that universal Christ consciousness pattern percolating, we can create a vibration, an energy that affects others who touch this work through a book, or attending a conference, or whatever. It's much more than the words on the page or the words from the speaker's mouth. There's really a kind of vibration when we're attuned as an organization, and that vibration can touch others much more effectively. How do we awaken that universal Christ consciousness pattern? There are two big focuses in the Cayce readings. They are choosing to meditate and choosing to manifest the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, gentleness, peace, long-suffering, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. To the extent that we do that, not to the extent that we present certain content from the readings. To the extent that we create that energy through the attunement that can come through meditation or manifesting the fruits of the Spirit, that universal Christ consciousness pattern will percolate. I think that's the promise in the readings. A second thing that's important is that lots of the life readings suggested that the people who were getting them had had past lifetimes in contact with this soul that we identify as Jesus, who became the Christ during the early church period, 2,000 years ago. But it's very clear in the readings that the soul we know as Jesus had previous incarnations. And that some of us, as souls in much earlier times, perhaps millions of years ago, had experiences with that soul. Although it's not spelled out in the readings, I think because this work has been involved with that soul in various lifetimes, especially that early church period. The chances are really good that those of us who come in contact with this work will benefit by being aware of that material related to this soul's lifetime as Jesus. To the extent that we're interested in our own spiritual growth, we should take a close look at that material. That's a special opportunity. I don't want to imply that we're an elite group. But the readings suggest that there's a special opportunity for us. We should consider taking a look at that aspect of this work, if we're interested in growing spiritually. An experience with this material may affect our own internal tuning fork. Another important aspect of the Jesus material is that when people were asking Edgar Cayce questions about Jesus, the man, and that soul, the information is some of the clearest, most moving material in those 14,000 readings. Just as we talk about precognition, or a psychic's ability to predict the future, There's a phenomenon called retrocognition, the ability of a psychic to tune into those patterns and thought forms that were the past, and experience, and describe them as if that person were there. You can look at the passages in the readings on the life and teachings of the Master Jesus. The detail, the clarity, the energy is amazing. This is the material that describes the picture with the broken lip at the Last Supper, and that kind of detail. John Robertson put together a book containing this material that I give away for Christmas, called The Christmas Story. The spirit of those words can be a source of inspiration for people. So, folks interested in the life and teachings of Jesus can come to this material and get a perspective that is very different from the historian's view. That's another reason for paying attention to this particular body of information in the readings. It would be helpful for many of us to take a closer look at the life and teachings of Jesus as we try to understand our own lives and our relationship to God. The readings present that life and those teachings in an extraordinarily vivid way. The Cayce readings on this soul known as Jesus, 2,000 years ago, say this soul has had many incarnations in the earth, and our existence in the earth as souls is tied to that soul. In the creation story of this first group of souls coming into the earth millions of years ago, that soul that we know as Jesus was a leader, an instigator, an initiator in that whole process. The point is there is a big picture presented here in the readings related to this soul referred to as Jesus. But that soul has a much deeper, longer history. It's helpful to understand that longer-term process as we try to understand why we're in the earth now. So, the picture that's presented in the readings of the creation story, and how that is tied to that soul that we know as Jesus, is crucial in the story of humankind in the earth. There have been questions about the source of the Cayce readings. Once in a rare while, discarnate entities spoke through EDGAR CAYCE. At those times he functioned as a kind of medium. His voice changed. But that was very rare. In response to that question, the readings themselves talked about a universal source. But also, there were people who felt that a large part of the material in the Cayce readings might be attributed to teachings of Jesus who became the Christ. On a number of occasions people asked Edgar Cayce, in trance, to name the source of the information that was coming through. In reading 254-85 he was asked, "Would it meet thy will and the will of the Father, if, henceforth, the readings given by Edgar Cayce should be designated as pronouncements of the speaking of Jesus here, and the Father, speaking of God, given as is justified by the merit of those asking?" The answer was, "This is the condition, this is the activity. Yet be ye all things to all men, thereby ye may save the more. For he that declares as a name, in a name, save in the universality of the Father, limits the ability of the seeker, of the channel through which that glory may come to any. Learn rather that given, by what name shall I say that I am sent? Answer, I am that I am. That rather than in any name of this, that or the other manner. The I am that seeks may gain, then, that access to the I am that brought, brings, holds, the worlds in their place. The I am refers to universal forces. If this material about this soul, and about the incarnation of this soul in the earth as Jesus, is such a central part of the Cayce readings, how do we present that? How do we let people know that? And this reading touches on the importance of not pushing that name. It says to talk about the universality of the source of the readings. If that material is so central to this work and to our understanding of our spiritual development, how do we present it to people? In my opinion, it's not to be announced as the source of the readings. That name, Jesus or Buddha, or whatever, if used too quickly, limits the ability of the seeker. So, how do we present it? I hope that we will continue to develop a structure that virtually every person who comes in contact with this work has the opportunity, maybe more than the opportunity, to get on a track that would lead them to this material. And this material on Jesus Christ, the Christ Spirit, universal Christ consciousness, would touch people in such a way that they would want to be a part of this work.